We feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Well, it has been a hard-fought and exciting election, and today we're looking at the race for the White House through the eyes of 4 African Americans. 2 liberals on the left here, and on the right we have 2 conservatives. They are Dr. Carol Swain, a passionate supporter of President Donald Trump. She went door-to-door campaigning for his re-election, and she's a former professor of political science at Princeton University. Below her, we have the conservative YouTuber, Amazing Lucas, who joins us from Los Angeles, California. He's very much an anomaly in that very blue state. We'll also be hearing from our 2 Democrats. John Eaves is a local politician in Georgia who's met Joe Biden a couple of times. And Laika Vinson is a Democrat strategist in the hotly contested state of North Carolina, where her husband is also running in a local election. Now, some of them have been up all night, so forgive them if they're a bit all over the place. I'm only kidding. Laika, we'll start with you. Who cares about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump? How did your husband do?
That is the important question. I mean, he's not running for the presidential election, but he ran for a local election. Unfortunately, we did not come out with a big W on this one, but there were a lot of lessons learned.
Well, at least he's got some nice balloons to look forward to. Amazing. How did you spend the night?
I haven't slept, so I actually have been up all night. I felt like a kid before Christmas, which starting to seem like there's coal.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see who all the gifts are for, won't we? Carol, how did you spend election night?
I've watched the returns until 2 a.m. and I went to bed knowing that nothing would be decided in the hours, to come. That it was going to be a long decision-making process.
Indeed, and that's a bit of an anticlimax, isn't it? John, same for you?
Well, I spent the night at home watching the returns using 2 televisions and watching major network news as well as CNN. So I wanted to make sure I heard different perspectives.
John, you worried me for a moment there. It sounded like an alibi. I was at home all night. Anyway, now, we have 2 conservatives and 2 liberals on our show for a bit of balance to the discussion. But don't let that fool you. Black Americans tend to vote Democrat, and by a wide margin. Take a look. Here's a question. Since the beginning of the new millennium, over the past 5 presidential elections, what percentage of black voters, on average, voted Democrat? 60, 70, 80, or 90%? If you guessed 90, you're closest. On average, 91% of black Americans voted for the Democrat candidate, just 8% going to the Republican candidate. And that's why Joe Biden claimed they were not a diverse group.
Unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community.
Now that annoyed some black Americans, and in some ways, Biden's comments are wholly wrong.
Man, Joe, you just crazy as hell. I mean, Joe has been saying stuff like this for years. This is not surprising.
Yes, African Americans overwhelmingly vote Democrat, but that doesn't mean they are overwhelmingly liberal. In fact, they identify just as much as conservatives. And they tend to be more religious than white Americans, with around 8 in 10 black Americans identifying as Christian compared to 7 in 10 of their white counterparts. And yet, election after election, black Americans vote blue. And this has led to some complacency among Democrat politicians.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
By contrast, Republican politicians have to work hard for black votes, and even then, it's usually in vain.
What do you prefer? Blacks for Trump or African Americans for Trump? I think so.
Trump spent quite a lot of his time courting the black vote, being photographed with celebrities, holding gatherings for conservative supporters, and actually reforming the criminal justice system. And this is testimony to how important the black vote has become.
It's not just for the Democrats, it's for politics as a whole. Black voters generally come to the rescue for certain candidates who appeal to African-American voters, appeal to the issues that they care about.
There are now a record 30 million black people eligible to vote, which makes them the third biggest voting group by race after whites and Hispanics. And crucially, more than a third of them live in swing states, the ones that so often make the difference in presidential elections.
The fight between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, of course, for those crucial battleground states that will decide this election, including Arizona, Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
So a record 30 million eligible black American voters, but how many of them turn out is just as critical. And that depends on who's on the ballot. Just look at Gore, look at Kerry, not great, but when Obama comes along versus McCain and Romney, it shoots up. And then back down again for Hillary versus Trump. We all know what happened next.
I love this country. Thank you very much.
So a fundamental and key question, why do African Americans favor the Democrat Party so much? John?
The overwhelming majority of African Americans still are very staunch and very dedicated Democrats. It goes back to the early 1960s. In terms of what the Kennedy administration did, the Johnson administration did in terms of voting, and to even a certain degree historically from that point on. I believe that what Trump has done over the past several years has been very cosmetic. It has not been real. He has talking points about opportunity zones, about criminal justice reform, about blacks having unemployment rates relatively low, but I think that is just cosmetic. He has not been consistent in terms of what he has, in a very authentic way, delivered for black people who overwhelmingly are Democrat.
John, you're talking about loyalty and affinity built up since the 60s and maybe the early 70s, but let's bring it a bit further up to date. And we've got, or we were going to have a guest on, a young lady from Texas who said she switched after realizing that, it was the Biden crime bill, 1994, that put her father away for some 20 years. I mean, he's got a certain record that's not very favorable with some African Americans anyway.
Well, that's true. He's apologized for that. And that was 20-something plus years ago. But this is 2020 and hopefully soon 2021 when he's president. And I'm just very confident that despite the crimes bill, he also led with the economic recovery during the Obama administration. He did a lot of things that were very positive for African Americans. He was incredibly loyal to President Obama, which is very important for the overwhelming majority of black people. And there is certainly a heightened comfort level and familiarity with Vice President Biden in terms of being president of the United States among African Americans.
Carol, what's interesting is you used to be a Democrat, and in terms of demographics, you are supposed to be the most staunchly Democrat supporter. So what happened?
I left the Democratic Party in 2009, and there were a number of things that happened. One is I became a devout Christian, and as I grew in my faith, I could not support the policies of the Democratic Party. And I've also watched over the years how Democrats overpromise to blacks. They never deliver. They use the vote, and they use black politicians to sell white candidates that ultimately disappoint the black community. And it's been a pattern that I've watched over many years.
What do you think, Amazing? Why do the African Americans favor the Democrat Party for so long now?
Well, I think it's primarily because our door is never knocked on in a serious manner. I think that resulted in a feedback loop where Republicans thought they're not going to vote for us. And because we didn't see any, serious offers or any type of reach out, we assumed they didn't want our vote. And I think that persisted up until the Trump administration.
Laika, do you think the Democrats really have earned this level of loyalty from African-American voters?
It's not a question of whether or not the Democrats have won the loyalty as much as it is that you look at the Republican rhetoric and it does not resonate with African Americans. So when you talk about loyalty, they cannot be loyal to the Republicans and vote in line with Republicans based on the rhetoric that's been spewed out at least for the last 4 years.
According to the exit polls, Trump's improved his turnout amongst black voters by, from 8% 16 to 12% this year. I'm just wondering, Amazing, how much of that was down to the younger African-American voter as opposed to the older one? There have been some articles indicating that younger African Americans, particularly males, are kind of impressed with him. What do they see in him?
Well, I think it stems from the dismissiveness and arrogance that John Eaves just stated by him saying that it started 20 years ago as far as the crime bill, even though it's having a rippling effect in the communities till this day. You just can't dismiss a felony or your life being ruined and tarnished. And I think a lot of that has been rectified, or at least attempted, via actions done by the Trump administration, such as the prison reform, opportunity zones. I think it's that olive branch that is being shown to many that has caused such individuals, which many people have never thought in a million years, as Ice Cube or Waka Flocka or Lil Wayne, to jump on board and see if something can be done. And I think it's that opportunity that's now being seen as available, where it was mainly just one choice, where now it's binary, where like I have another option.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely powerful when you see someone who wants to help.
Now, you've mentioned some quite famous cultural figures there, Lil Wayne, Ice Cube, Kanye, and most recently, Lil Pump. I didn't even know he existed. And I believe that President Trump may have called him Little Pimp. I'm not entirely sure. But look, let's have a listen to the soundbite.
Speaking of sound, music, and other things, one of the big superstars of the world, Little Pimp. There he is. How's it going? Do you want to come up and say something? Do you want to? Come on. Little Pump. Come on up here.
MAGA 2020. Don't forget that. Don't forget that. And do not vote for Sleepy Joe at all.
Amazing. How much impact do those endorsements make?
It depends. It depends on how much impact the individual feels towards those endorsements, and whether or not they are serious, and whether or not if they're taken to its full extent, or if it's just seen as more pandering. I think there comes a point in time where you have one person, it may be pandering, a second person, a third person, a fourth person, a fifth person, before you start saying, okay, maybe they actually are trying to help, to assist, to actually hear us. And I think that's extremely powerful. I think we're going to see that in this election by the turnout.
Laika, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so I know that Amazing was talking about the fact that we have President Trump and his administration working on crime reform, but let's compare that to Joe Biden's record 20 years ago in the crime bill. The unfortunate part of it is when you ask who's being taken advantage of, I think that Black Republicans are being taken advantage of. They can be shown this crime reform and believe that the Trump administration truly has Black interests in mind. However, when you look at the fact that Trump has appointed over 100 federal judges and not one of them is African American, when you look to social justice and the fact that the Trump administration is not involved, and nor do they believe in systematic racism, it's obvious to me who's being taken advantage of and who's being brainwashed. And
Carol,
it's
you want to come in?
Yes, I do. And I am very concerned about the critical race theorists and how they are dividing America along race lines. And we all lose in a society where you have a political party that's willing to push a race agenda, dividing people. They are also targeted the police, the Democrats, this defund the police movement. No one suffers more than Black people when we don't have strong police forces. And so instead of reforming the police, they have pushed defunding the police. And 80% of Black Americans have said in a Gallup poll that they want more police presence in their community. They're not necessarily happy with the quality of the interactions. If you look at what President Trump has done for Black people, millions of dollars he's given to historically Black colleges and universities. He's put them at the table. If you look at the opportunity zones and the criminal justice reform, these are things that Blacks had hoped President Obama would do. He did not do it. He could have done those things. He didn't. And I believe that if President Trump loses to Joe Biden, it will be by the margin of voter fraud. He needed, President Trump needed a landslide to make up for the votes that we know would be stolen. And I think in Georgia and a lot of those states, when they start digging in they're going to find lots of corruption. We're already getting reports. And so I believe that this will be a stolen election if we're not careful.
Well, those are reports at the moment, Carol, but we will see in the coming days how that will play out. Now, we chose to concentrate on the so-called black vote today because race and police brutality are big issues in this election, and that's not surprising given the events of the past year.
Overnight, Minneapolis on fire.
Police have been firing pepper spray to try and disperse this crowd.
From the outside, at least, America appears chaotic, divided, angry.
Whose lives matter? Black lives matter.
The killings of unarmed black Americans, including Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, by white police officers, led to mass, often violent protests across the country.
Protesters torching in Minneapolis.
The mainstream media lay much of the blame at the door of the president.
We're going to see the president resort to his typical techniques of sowing this kind of chaos and division.
His political rivals also blame him.
He pours fuel on every single racist fire, every single one.
The protests are certainly bigger and more widespread compared to the Biden-Obama era, but that's not to say there wasn't unrest during the previous administration. Remember, the nascent Black Lives Matter movement burst onto the scene in 2014, during Obama's second term, after the police killed 2 unarmed black men. Eric Garner, choked to death in New York, and Michael Brown, shot dead in Ferguson, Missouri. The unrest lasted for weeks, and protesters were met with heavily armed SWAT teams, authorized by the governor, Jay Nixon, a Democrat.
Lives and property must be protected.
Memories and video are one thing, but what do the numbers say about the police shootings of unarmed black Americans? After the Ferguson protests, the Washington Post began collating the most authoritative data. The records go back to 2015, the final full year of the Obama presidency. In that year, 38 unarmed black people were shot dead by police. During the Trump presidency, that number's actually declined. Last year, it was 14, and so far this year, 10 unarmed black people have been shot dead by police.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
It's true that more unarmed white people are shot dead by police, but given the black population is much smaller, African Americans are still more than twice as likely to be victims. But some conservatives say even that's debatable.
It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent, it matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent. And unfortunately, black community commits a disproportionate amount of crimes compared to the white community.
Okay, back to our guests now. Amazing. If the number of fatal police shootings have decreased under President Trump, why is it that we've seen far more protests?
I think in certain cases, it's more of the bipolar schizophrenic response. I think it enrages people where you may have the same, almost similar or comparable instances that are responded differently based on the officers. I think due to that and inaction in some cases, whether it's Tim Scott's bill that was trying to address police reform and completely snubbed. I think it's the lack of action regards the standards of police enforcement.
Yeah, Laika, you wanted to come in?
So I just have to believe that Black Republicans are sort of living in this bubble that the rest of the world is not aware of. To believe that the president's rhetoric has nothing to do with the actual protest is alarming. There is a president that incites violence, encourages Proud Boys to stand by instead of not involving themselves in the political race. And to believe that that doesn't have an influence on why people are protesting is ridiculous. They're tired. The Black community is tired. And so we don't know how to make the changes that we want the political process to take up and make. So therefore, we resort to protesting because we believe that's what's worked in the past, and hopefully it will work now.
The Black community is reacting to groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter that are very Marxist in their orientation. and they have stirred the pot. I think as Black people, we have a crime problem, we have a victimization problem, and we have a problem where lots of young Black people don't respect authority. They don't respond to lawful police officers. And so in many of these situations where people were shot, they did have weapons of some sort or they resisted arrest. And I think that if we focus more on how to de-escalate situations, we would not have the shootings that we do have. And I believe for the Black community, crime is a serious problem. The rioting, the looting, it's not justified by it's not justified by these incidents that take place. And so I would like to see the Black community take responsibility for some of these things that are taking place, but also to train our young people to respect police authority, the authority of teachers. Then we would have fewer people that end up in unfortunate situations.
That's crazy. You know, Black people are saying, like Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
They should be tired of the crime taking place in their communities, the Black on Black crimes.
A disproportionate
They're only concerned about Black lives when a police officer is involved. What about the abortion rate?
Trump
Black women
has refused to acknowledge that Black lives matter. He cannot even say the words.
Well, Black Lives Matter is an organization that is very Marxist. There's a difference between the slogan and the organization.
Okay, so Carol, John was just saying that Donald Trump can't even say the words Black Lives Matter. Why do you defend that?
I'm not defending it. I think that he has said that all lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter. Black Lives Matter is an organization that has been named in a way that who can disagree with it? Of course, Black Lives Matter. I wish Black people would show that they believe Black Lives Matter by focusing on the crime that takes place in our communities and the abortion rate, where Black women are 12.4% of the population. They're getting 37% of the abortion. Those lives matter too. And so I think
that's
that
irrelevant, Karen.
with
The
President,
question was, why hasn't your president said Black Lives Matter? He has not said that out of his mouth.
Why should he say it? Of course Black Lives Matter. That's an organization. No one's going to bow on their knees to an organization
We're not
that's
Marxist.
Marxist.
The question is, have you ever heard President Trump say Black Lives Matter? Has that come out of his mouth?
You're trying to force people to.
Well, if I may.
Okay, let's have amazing. Look, the key thing is here, amazing, is the difference between a truism, Black Lives Matter, and the group Black Lives Matter. Can you just delineate that for us?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to tackle, but I think words may ring hollow as opposed to actions. I think through actions he's shown that to him Black Lives Matter. When it comes to discipline or whatnot, I think respect is great, but I think respect is earned. I think Black people very much care about Black lives, hence why they are protesting when they're taken. I think there's only one person or one group when arriving on the scene that's actually been to the police academy. I think so. When many instances, I think it's a bit of tone deaf when it comes to Republican side, who tries to villainize many of the victims in these police officer-involved shootings, instead of focusing that same scrutiny upon the officers. I think that's where that disconnect and that issue stems from. But I think we also need to delineate between, as far as, like you said, Black Lives the sentiment and Black Lives the organization. I think that's also a fork in the road, which there's some gray area or misunderstanding or miscommunication between.
Guys, just a final last question for you. It's the morning after the election. Very hard to predict what's going to happen in the coming days, but let's give it a shot. Amazing. Go for it.
I think it's definitely going to go to the Supreme Court. I don't think Trump's going to take a loss without fighting.
Dr. Carol Swain?
I agree with Amazing's assessment. It will go to the courts, and the Supreme Court may ultimately make the decision, because we're in new territory with the mail-in ballots and the way the absentee ballots, how long ballots are going to be counted. And I think that that will determine who the next president is.
John?
Biden's going to win. He's going to have at least 272 electoral votes. He's going to win Nevada. He's going to win Arizona. He's going to win Michigan. And he's also going to win Wisconsin. In my home state of Georgia, I don't know, but it's trending towards a very close, even split between Biden and Trump.
Lakai, finally, do you agree with that?
I do agree with John. I think that Biden is going to pull through with those last several states that we're counting on to win this presidential election.
Well, it's an old cliche that only time will tell, but in this case, it really is true. And then we're going to get all four of you back and make you think about what you said here. No, thank you very much, all four of you, for your contributions to the Nexus. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, you can see this episode and our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week, then, goodbye.